Welcome to this second season of Rise, The Industry Strikes Back. From Lausanne, where universities here, including mine, reopened their doors today to thousands of students with lots of questions, many confusions, and some very challenging technologies. I am Professor Demian Hodari of EHL Lausanne.
And from lovely, not London, but rather Tbilisi in Georgia at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Welcome to my hotel room, traveling for the first time in 6 months. My name is Mendiratta, and I'm thrilled to be back with you all for season 2, joining Demian Hodari for what has been an unprecedented project that has been a great blessing. And Demian, I'll say it again, admittedly, I have missed you. We are so excited to welcome everyone back on Rise, which has been a journey that we've taken since April. It's incredible to see how our world has changed, and we're very blessed to have had you all with us. We've taken this journey trying to figure out what exactly is happening in travel, tourism, and hospitality. How is it changing the next normal of the world we're going to enter into? And what does that mean for all of us, students, graduates, professionals, people who've dedicated their lives and their livelihoods and their passions to travel and tourism. We're very excited to have you back for season 2, episode 1. Demian, tell us what's ahead.
Yeah, well, we called this episode On Tour because we're looking at tour operators. Last season we looked at hotels, restaurants, airlines, travel agencies. We looked at online distribution, and we looked at all those individually. And we thought, what better way to start this season than by looking at all of those together through the lens of tour operators who have to do all those things themselves. And if you can imagine being in any one of those industries must be challenging, imagine being in all of them at the same time in this environment. So we're thrilled to have Gavin TOLLMAN with us today, who's probably a leading expert in this area and someone who's living these challenges day to day. And we'll be with him in just a little while.
So now we go into poll number 1, sir.
Yeah. So if we could magically make that first poll appear, and thank you, Anita, for remembering to do that. All right, and let's see what people said. We were very curious just to check in with everybody after this long hiatus, and we can see there in orange, right? Concerned and optimistic are the two leading answers from people. And I guess in third place, it looks like it would be frustrated, followed by inspired. Not too many people are happy, which is a sad thing to see, nor are they sad. So it's a little bit like we're all over the place, Anita, and I guess that makes sense.
Indeed, it does. And I must say, I had to smile looking at this, thinking that I think you being the grouch actually inspired how this has come out, because we had all the 7 dwarves, or almost all of them. I'll take credit for being happy, but you, the grouch, and me as happy came out perfectly in terms of concerned and confident. It's ironic how people are halfway between both, because it's still uncertain times, things are changing, we continue on together.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think nobody really knows what's happening or what's going to happen. So there's a lot of confusion for everybody. And I think also if we ask tomorrow, we could get slightly different results, because I think, everything is changing so quickly and so much day to day that it's hard to really know how we feel sometimes.
That's a really good point. So to that point, we now go into our setting the scene in terms of what in the world is going on. And we've always wanted to put this up front as a way of separating, as we say, the news from the noise. So we carry on into seeing what in the world is going on. We've blended what's happening in the world with what's happening in the industry to get a sense of how do these two now connect. So what's happened in our world in the last month since we were all together? Some of the numbers to note: it's 178 days since COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic. Remarkable. 28 million cases globally, worldwide, 28.6 officially this morning. There are 24 vaccines in trial, 5.7 billion, yes, a billion, vaccines on pre-order around the world. 33% of the people in the US and the UK, however, are still not willing to take a vaccine. So the vaccine is not the messiah. It's not going to be what is going to take care of our industry, because a lot of people just don't want to take it. 95% decline in international and travel going into the Northern Hemisphere summer. This is really interesting. 53% of destinations around the world are easing restrictions. Now that's significant. That's 150 15 countries compared to 28 countries who at the end of season 1 were going into easing restrictions. But one thing we know for certain, there is 100% uncertainty as to what the impact is going to be of little people going back to school. Demian and the older crowd, sorry, Demian, you as the elder leading the older crowd of students going back to universities and colleges. All of this is a learning curve. We are living the great hypothesis.
Yeah, good point. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned the easing of restrictions, because if you look here, I brought this up several times during season 1. It was just a great way to measure the strictness with which different countries have imposed restrictions on their people in terms of travel, moving around, leaving their homes, etc. And you can see from when we filmed the last episode in July 20th, moving forward, there has not been much change, which means even though there could be some slight modifications, right? Brazil lowered some standards, Italy has raised some of the strictness. Overall, we're not seeing a lot of change in the way the governments are seeing the pandemic or seeing the crisis that it's causing. And I brought this up just to say, when we started back in April, we had no idea how long this was going to last. I'm not sure we would have said that come the middle of September, what is that, 5 months later, we'd be in as strict or close to as strict protocols as we were then. And it seems like we still are. So it's kind of a sign of this is not going away. It's not going anywhere soon. And this is really the now normal right now, as we are living in this situation. And I don't really foresee much change. Like you said, until vaccine or until the world has accepted to take a vaccine, probably sometime next year. So anybody who's expecting big changes over the next couple of months, I don't see it.
I'm so pleased you mentioned that, Demian, because the big changes that are happening are the changes in the regulations, and it's happening quickly. So within 6 hours, a country can ultimately turn around and say, anyone coming in from X into Y now needs to quarantine. I need to quarantine as soon as I get back to Georgia. We know that's changing. So sadly, the only changes are not necessarily inspiring ones, which is why I'm carrying on into your favorite subject, which is aviation. And I wanted to point this out because this is very interesting. Travel and tourism does not exist without aviation. We know that at the peak of the pandemic, there were 16,000 aircraft that were grounded around the world. Slowly, airlines are getting back out again, mainly with domestic and regional, a little bit of international, but it's based on where's the market demand, where's the revenue, and where's the confidence around borders. I found this fascinating from the point of view of how economy and premium class are now changing, because there was hypothesis around business travel is going to increase. How are airlines managing that? Because we know that the yield of business travel was always much higher. Both of them are slowly creeping back up, but that's still at 80% down compared to a year ago. What was fascinating is how business class costs have gone down 70% year on year. Economy's gone down lower. The hypothesis at the beginning of COVID-19 was that with the collapse of the industry, air costs were going to get higher. But clearly the airlines are saying, we just need to get people back in the air and then we'll get the reading turning black again. Very interesting.
Sure is. You know, and airlines feed into hotels, and from our friends at STR, they presented this last week, and I just have to share it with our audience as well. Right, showing across a number of European countries occupancy rates over the last 6 months or so. And I think the part of the far right is the most interesting part, right? We started to get some occupancies back up there near 50% in a lot of countries, and you can clearly see that upward trend, but it's been dropping off over the last few weeks again. So the question is, and STR raises, is it dropping off again because of the concerns about the second wave of the pandemic and people's reluctance to travel again? Or is it just that was summer, people needed to travel, have a little bit of vacation, and they're not going to do that again for quite a while? We don't quite know the cause for this drop off yet. It's probably a mixture of the two, but it's something to keep an eye on. When will those occupancy levels level off so we can have a little bit more forecasting of demand in the industry? Most signs are showing that we're going to continue to see a drop off over the next few months, and that could get much worse again as winter settles into the northern hemisphere and fears of that second and third wave really take over. We want to go back to this idea that we started about halfway through last season, which is the 30-second challenge, where I posed a question to Anita that she doesn't have any foreknowledge about, and then she'll do the same to me. And this time, these questions are coming from us and not from the audience this time. So Anita, my question is probably something you guest that I was going to ask you about. You've just taken your first flight since 6 months, and I'm curious, honest, what is the advice you're giving to people that are either reluctant to travel or have to travel but don't necessarily want to? What was it like? What's the key thing you want to share?
Heavens, three messages: relax, have confidence, manage expectations. That's really important because the next normal is still, as we've said, managing around the protocols. Some airlines like KLM, when I was flying across, which I have to admit, I had that song in my head from that video that we both love when they closed down before the pandemic really hit. They were in their blue uniforms wearing blue masks. The crew on Georgian Airlines were wearing full PPE from neck to foot.
Wow.
Get used to it. And yet they served a hot meal. So it's more a matter of everyone's trying to figure out what is acceptable, what's not. Everyone is nervous, not just the travelers, but the people who are there carrying the travelers. So ultimately, just relax, be ready, manage expectations, and have faith. So my question to you: we said at the beginning of this, Demian, that ultimately a crisis is a source of inspiration. You've gone back to school. I would like to understand from your perspective, now that you've had your first class this morning, and sorry, you're a man of great class, but you've had your first actual class this morning. How has this been a good thing for how the world of teaching can now be executed now that we have this hybrid model? What's the good innovation coming from this?
I guess it's part of what my school strategy is to be able to offer the education to more people. So there was always the idea of online education, but we're using this high flex model. So some students are in class, some students are at home, and they rotate. And that will actually allow the school to grow and other schools to grow and offer, university education, hopefully at a lower cost to more people. I'm also able to bring in a lot of industry executives to my class, even more than I usually can, because there's less need for them to travel and come to the school to do it. They just jump on, we're using Microsoft Teams. They jump on there. We can interact with them for an hour or two and thus expose students to a lot more people. So there are some benefits. There's a whole lot of drawbacks so far, but hopefully those benefits will eventually become even stronger and outweigh the negatives.
Really good point. Brilliant. So now we move to my favorite part of the program, which is the headlines, where we reveal what's really caught our attention in the last, I would say, week, but actually in the last month. How about you give it a go?
Sure. I've got two headlines for us because I'm only allowed two. This is the first one. It's a combination of two. Marriott International laying off 673 employees. United Airlines halves planned layoffs to 16,000. I hate to start the season with bad news, but I mean, that is my reputation. Marriott's laying off 17% of its corporate employees. These are many of the people who were furloughed or temporarily laid off back in March when the pandemic hit. And basically, it's a sign of Marriott saying things aren't going to be getting any better. We're making that permanent. And I don't want to single out Marriott, but a lot of the companies are going to be making a lot of those temporary layoffs permanent. The United one looks kind of positive. Oh, they're only going to lay off half the number of people. But really, I think that was a ploy. And this 16,000 is really a sign that the government subsidies that have been keeping the airlines afloat up until October, as those disappear, especially in the US, these numbers are going to skyrocket. And I think you're going to see a lot of problems in the airline industry. People just aren't flying enough for these airlines to be able to continue to pay everybody. And I think this is it's a sad situation, but one that we have to acknowledge that the human toil of what's going on is the primary issue for the industry. And I got a second headline, which again is a combination. Pret, which is Pret a Manger, offers 5 coffees a day for £20 a month, and airlines drop most change fees permanently. This goes back a little bit to what you were saying before. This is about driving demand. These companies are recognizing that all that matters right now is generating sales, getting people back out into our restaurants, getting them back onto the airlines, demonstrating to them that they can do so in a good fashion, safely, and without too much fear. And 5 coffees a day for £20, that comes out to 150 doses of caffeine for 13 cents or 13 pence a shot. Can't beat that. But again, signs that firms are struggling and they're looking for anything they can do to generate demand. So get out there and get your caffeine, Anita.
I must say, Demian, of all the headlines you've ever shown me, nothing has scared me more than the headline about Pré Manger, because the idea of you having 5 coffees a day with that much caffeine, I have no idea how much grouchiness I'd be able to handle with that. So let me go to mine. It's funny how we're on a theme of around consumption. This I thought was spectacular. It's a program that the UK put on through August, brilliant, called Eat Out to Help Out. The idea being that in addition to VAT being dropped from 20% to 5% for the industry, it was giving people £10 off per person, excluding alcohol, for a meal out, Monday through Wednesdays. Brilliant idea. Not only did it actually mobilize the supply chains again, in terms of getting all those meals served, 64 million in a month, I think more importantly, the mental health crisis of COVID-19 that we've talked about since the beginning, this was brilliant because it inspired people to just start getting out again and get past the nervousness of doing so. When we come to nervousness and doing so, we go to my second headline. And this made me very concerned because quite honestly, this is the new reality. And the next normal is going to be, as they say perfectly, quarantine roulette. The why bother has always been my biggest fear about this time in terms of recovery of our industry. When people put all their hopes, all their expectations, all their money into finally traveling again, to go on holiday knowing that your government might say, great, you're coming home, but you're going to be grounded for 2 weeks. On top of that, people traveling to a destination might find that they're going there on holiday. Actually not, they're being put in quarantine. So this made me very clearly cautious around, and I love the use of the word roulette, because for a lot of holiday seekers, that's the why bother that just gets them to stay home. So my video for this week, it's 30 seconds because I know you're not a fan of aviation, but I had to throw in an aviation. Now, technically it is an aviation video, but in a former life. And I thought it was really smart in terms of how a brand is turning around and saying, we can still create a relationship with you, recognizing the reality, even though we can't fly anymore. What can't fly anymore? Technically, the chickens. I thought that was brilliant. I'm sure you're going to turn around and say, sorry, that was just foul, which I appreciate. But in these days when we're told not to touch our fingers, to keep everything away from our eyes and our mouths, I thought that was absolutely classic. So I share that with you, aviation in disguise, sir.
All good, man. All right, thanks for that, Anita. Let's move forward into our second poll, and then we're going to use that as our lead into our extensive talk with Gavin TOLLMAN and our executives in residence. So if you could please answer the following question. So almost half did not take any kind of holiday. Those that did, more or less split between going international and domestically, but still half didn't take a holiday. And I'm guessing that many of them would have in a normal year. It's summer vacation. And so I think it's kind of a sign that people are, hesitant to leave, don't really see the benefit of it. I went international for a week and domestic for about a week. I don't know about you. I think you stayed at home, right?
I did indeed. I didn't have a holiday, but I love my homes. That's fine. But interesting to your point, because technically where you are in the world and where a lot of our viewers are right now, international is actually regional, which is an extension of domestic. It's not as if it's long haul as it would have been in a normal time where you've got Asia coming to Europe and the Americas, etc. So really interesting. It's now my great pleasure to take over and actually introduce our executive in residence. I am thrilled to welcome to the Rise stage a leader whom I absolutely adore, respect, think the world of, he and his family. It's Gavin TOLLMAN. He's the CEO of Trafalgar Tours, Cost Saver, and Brendan Vacations. He represents a brand that has been leading the industry since 1947, so a long long time before he was even born. It has been touching the lives of 5 million plus guests. Now, just think of that number. That's quite remarkable. They are innovators of going beyond the touring and actually getting people to understand the people and the places where they go with offerings such as Be My Guest, where you literally have the chance to dine with locals, going through their markets, going through their home, and actually sitting at the dinner table to understand not just a place, but the heartbeat of the place through its people. Very importantly, it's part of the Travel Corporation, which includes Kentucky, Uniworld, a huge number of brands itself, largest family-run company in the world with over 30 brands, I believe, at last count, and celebrating 100 years in 2020, celebrating a centenary that they decided, you know what? 101 is a pretty good number as well. So let's rather push it off and celebrate all of us getting through another crisis. Not the first one, not the last, but reason to celebrate when we get to the other side. Gavin, I love you dearly. I'm thrilled to have you on board. Full disclosure, you've been a client for mine for over 10 years. I adore your family. Welcome, welcome, welcome on behalf of Demian and myself.
And for me, wonderful to be with both of you and obviously talking about something all of us are incredibly passionate about and making sure we are ready for what is to come.
Gavin, two things. First, well, welcome and great choice in the dark coat, white shirt, and glasses. I think that's a very smart look for you.
Well,
Second,
separated at birth somewhere along there. I've lost the COVID beard though, so otherwise they would not have known who was who here, Demian.
let me ask you, that results from that poll, half the people not holidaying. I don't know if you have data from normal summers. Do half the people not take summer holidays, or are you seeing clearly less holidaying, obviously, this year? And what's your perception of that?
So it actually, historically, if we look at it, our holidays is something, particularly in Europe, is a given. Here we all know in Switzerland, in fact, it is mandatory that everyone's got to take a minimum of 2 weeks holiday. Yeah. So the fact is, holidays are no longer a luxury. They've actually become a given of part of our day-to-day life. So seeing those statistics are very much aligned of the year that we've seen. And to me, Demian, they come into really two buckets. Number one, the fact that an enormous number of consumers, not just in this poll here, but we're seeing it everywhere, did push the pause button and say, no, I am not taking a holiday in 2020. And it's been regretful. But number two, those who did traveled regionally. Long haul international travel is non-existent. The only travel that we are seeing at present is domestic or regional travel.
And did you see the staycation issue really take over the way many people were saying, or was there still enough people, or still quite a bit of people leaving their country and going regionally? I know there's the issue of borders closing is keeping people at home, but from what I've been hearing, the staycation didn't really predominate like people had thought.
And we've seen an enormous shift in different parts of the world. When we look at the United States, staycation and the whole utilization of RVs, of people traveling, obviously with COVID world and making sure they lived within those boundaries of being able to take care of themselves, we saw a huge surge in people looking to travel with RVs in Europe. Particularly with the uncertainty that came with this ever shifting of borders opening, shutting, opening, this great, and when I saw that poll earlier of, the dichotomy between those concerned versus those optimistic, I think that is a direct reflection of this desire for all of us, Demian, to get out and travel. Mm-hmm. There's a real, actually, we're all sitting here in varying degrees with cabin fever, but on the opposite side, because of the uncertainty of the unknown to go, there's a real underlying concern. And the way we've approached that is really looking at the reality as seeing it as yeah, what are the opportunities that will present to us, recognizing those two variables.
Gavin, I'd like to build on that because you spoke very much about being able to navigate through this new reality. And one of the beauties of touring has always been the promise of taking care of the hassle, taking care of the concern. People can just get on board and go. One thing I found, admittedly, as a sample size of one, was that coming across from London to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Tbilisi, 2 airlines, 2 airports, 1 hotel, was the issue of expectations and getting people ready for the fact that, as we always say, there's no going back to normal, because there's no going back and there's no normal. You've been really good in making sure that through the whole experience of the dreaming, the choosing, the research, the booking, and the purchasing, that you inform people. How are you able to manage expectations of the desire and love to travel vis-a-vis the protocols needing to be respected and adhered to?
So, and Anita, you've actually hit the very issue of one of the greatest concerns of people looking to travel today. And really, to me, I break it down into the following key variables. First and foremost is, and if you cannot overcome hurdle 1, people won't travel, is really looking at, are you going to take care of my well-being? And you know, the interesting thing on well-being is the degree of consciousness that people have you really thought this through? And you know, we looked at that in the following way. First and foremost was when you were going to come on our trips, how we were going to train our tour directors, how we were going to train our coach drivers, what are all the protocols we were going to do. And one of the things we saw very, very early on, Anita, was there was going to be a slight void. And, you know, and obviously you've spoken about the airline industry. And one of the things we saw was the need for an additional position sitting on every single one of our trips. And that was something we called a well-being director. Someone whose specific job role was to ensure before we arrived, did we understand the protocols? Did you have to have a mask? You know, before we arrived at a hotel, you know, making sure we had keys, how we were going to clean luggage before it got on. I mean, actually an entire position, which was a complete innovation and an enormous change in the way anyone had ever done business. I really want to go to what was number 2 then, what happens when you are traveling? And you know, once again, building that confidence, it was, you know, how do you ensure, and working with our suppliers to ensure that they adhere to the exact same protocols that we have now mandated. And you know, it is, and you know, we have had to make some very, very, very tough decisions. And you know, you asked, I can't remember, it was you or Demian as you did this introduction, you know, we touch all bases. So whether it's you know, great places we eat, wonderful places we stay, how we travel, we had to go out of our way, and our local operating teams everywhere, you know, we go to all 7 continents, had to make sure that every single one of our suppliers adhered to a very strict goal of what we had to do, what it had to look like. And you know, we had to make decisions, and we made some very tough ones very early on. If you wouldn't adhere to our standards, we were not going to do business with you in 2020 or now into 2021. Third of all, was really the hardest one of all, were the what ifs. And really the what ifs is so much of what we have spoken about. What happens if someone gets sick? What happens, you know, while they are traveling with us? And you know, we put in a few, once again, requisites. If people, you know, when guests were going to come and travel with us, we mandated wearing masks. You know, so if you did, and if you wanted to politicize and not wear a mask for whatever statement, we said absolutely fine, but you're not going to travel with us. Number 2 was, you know, our local, we went out of our way to understand all the local protocols of what was required in, you know, whether, you know, in Iceland, which was one of the great countries of making sure if you got sick, they were going to look after you, to others who said, basically, you're on your own. And what we did was we mandated that everyone traveling with us was going to, they didn't have to buy it through us. They would require some sort of insurance, travel insurance, which would have some form of COVID coverage. And so, but at the same time, how we were going to look after them. So what we went out of our way to do is then take that, Anita, and communicate that to the world. And, whether it was in seminars we've been holding, how we've approached it from a PR perspective, of actually going out and articulating this. And, one of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that TTC, having defined all of these protocols, we were actually the company that the World Travel and Tourism Council turned to actually work to understand what safe travels could be like, and have adopted many of the protocols we had. Because if you don't overcome that as a first step, people are going to be extremely reticent to travel.
So as you've always been almost the psychological insurance policy for guests, now you've elevated that. And part of it, people use the word pivot. I don't think it's pivoting. I think it's whiplash and how you've had to adjust, but it's keeping the guests first.
Well, it is. And, that agility, Anita, has got to always be driven around listening to our guests. And, it is fascinating of everything I've heard both you and Demian talk about earlier today, is when you look at Google Trends, and we spend a lot of time looking at that, you can see where people are searching, where do they want to go. And that is really driving so much of how we want to pivot, is based on consumer sentiments. And, to date, it appears to be working.
Interesting.
I want to say two things, if it's okay. First is remind our audience that we're going to be switching over to your questions real quickly. So be sending those questions in using that Q&A button at the bottom so that we can read those and try to answer them for you. And I want to go back to the well-being director that you mentioned before. Real quick, is that something you could see lasting a long time, even at post-pandemic? Is that something that you say is going to be an increasingly important part of our industry, even when we get past this crisis? People are going to have a long-term concern about travel, perhaps, and so we need this director helping us. Or is this something that you would eliminate and see being eliminated by other firms as soon as the pandemic is over?
So, the one thing we've learned during this crisis is not to make any big decisions and build greater flexibility into how we are going to do business moving forward. And so, certainly, we are going to have them in place for 2021. I would be reticent to say, we will be bringing out our pricing for 2022 in a couple of weeks, and I've costed in all of our prices without one. Okay. I've read the same statistics around vaccines, where we are. And certainly when I look at the following fundamentals, without travel, we have no travel industry. And whether or not we want a travel, a well-being director or not, somehow we need to get people back to traveling properly again and cohesively again. And so for the moment, I don't know. But once again, we will continue to monitor and be agile or pivot to where consumer sentiments are. Our opportunity is to make sure we're giving the consumer what they want, and that has really become the driving force behind everything we are doing. And we will continue to make sure we do so.
Thank you.
I'm intrigued that you maintained it for 2021. That says a lot about proceed with caution, but proceed with hope, which is quite nice. So, questions from our audience. I know there are a few that have been coming in. Our voice of God, Sarah, is back.
Hello. So I have a question from Jennifer in the UK. Some major tour operators, such as STA Travel and Trek America, didn't make it through 2020. Do you think this gap in the youth travel segment is worrying, or does it provide opportunities for the future?
Yeah, Gavin, how do you see that?
Sarah, I believe it's an enormous opportunity. And when I look at our industry, one of my biggest concern looking back and pre-COVID was some of the financial discipline that far too many in our business brought in. And I'm not saying Trek America or STA, I'm not pointing fingers at them necessarily, but you've got to make sure you're building your balance sheet in the good times to be ready there for the bad times. And particularly those who consistently and cohesively historically have always sold on price is problematic. And so I believe this is an immense opportunity. Clearly, we own a number of youth brands, one of them being Contiki, another one Busabout. In the UK, we have Haggis, we have Shamrocker. And when we look forward into the near term, and actually the fascinating thing, Sarah, is the following. The demand for youth travel of its comeback is actually higher amongst youth travel than it is of any of our open age brands. So, it is there for the taking, and certainly one we are watching very closely.
Sarah, another question?
Yes, we have one from Shrey, who is back in Switzerland. Do you believe work from home and work from anywhere are transforming the concept of vacations to something more nomadic?
So, Sarah, I'm going to answer that question from Shay in a couple of different ways. Number one is, and it's a fascinating article for those of you who haven't picked up The Economist. It's the lead story in The Economist this last week, which actually talks directly to whether or not we are in the midst of a fundamental change of how we are all going to work moving forward. So yes, I do believe in the world that we're in, we are seeing an enormous shift to how we will work moving forward. I don't know what it's going to look like when we come forward, but it is something we are looking at very carefully. What I'm intrigued by is what is the consequence of that? And that is really your core question here. And I believe, this entire thing of working, staying in our homes, the cabin fever you get by being there all the time is actually going to become a greater driving force for people to want to get out. One of the biggest losses during COVID-19 has been that of social interaction. The ability to go out, meet and engage with others is something people have missed immensely. And once we do start working more and more from home, the desire to get out and socialize with others is going to become even greater. Number two is the desire to go and learn from other cultures, actually broaden our horizons, is going to grow exponentially. And it's something, when I look forward, I'm actually fascinated by, and I guess somewhat optimistic that as a consequence of reading that article, I believe it becomes an even greater positive for travel for the future.
Gavin, I want to build on that, if I may, please. And I spoke about a little bit in the whole eat out to help out campaign that the UK ran. And you've always been really good about this. And I mentioned the whole be my guest concept. This crisis has revealed very clearly, like we've always thought, and I know you've thought this forever, travel and tourism is not just about the visitor, it's about the visited. And our industry stopping has exposed very rapidly and very vividly how many SMEs particularly, which are 80% of our industry, have closed, and lives and livelihoods been in the balance. How are you finding that's impacting the way in which you now speak to your future guests about their impact on the people and places they touch, not just the joy of them being there themselves?
Anita, one of the great tragedies of COVID-19 has been so many of the small businesses we helped build. And, one of the beauties of touring is the fact that you can actually build a long-term sustainable business for someone because you're coming there consistently to a place they can actually make a livelihood through travel. It's not sporadic. We set our series 2-3 years out, so they actually know it and can engage with us. And when I look back at the pride that we have had, and one of them that I just spoke to recently is a wonderful lady in Perugia. Her name is Marta. Marta is the last Renaissance type weaver. You know, she's got those huge looms made out of wood, which go backwards and forwards. You know, she's she's now the third generation using those looms. You know, she was literally, before we started going to get our guests to engage with her, days away from shutting down her business, and she's turned it into a thriving enterprise. And today she has almost zero income. You know, and the only income she has, she wrote to me, was that from past guests who are helping buy some fabrics from her, but you know, she's completely reliant, usually on people coming through and placing orders. And so you actually see it, whether it's the people we visit for food, and you know, you and I worked on you know, a B2G relationship where we went out, and because we could bring our guests to a rural community, we let the rural community set up its own cafe. We then bring our guests to their cafe. And again, without travelers, none of these people can survive. You know, what I continue to tell all of them is the following, you know, hold on, you know, do what you can to keep yourself going. And, you know, revenue generation and creative thinking has really been one of the great adaptations so many of us have had to think about. And so really working with them individually to, are there different ways? You know, I think of a great chef that we work with, Libero, in Florence, where we worked with him to get his food delivered to, you know, some of the healthcare workers in a different way. So he actually granted it on a very small basis, but he got at least some income coming in so he could survive. So that is really number one. Number two is the fact that really travel is going to come back. And I fundamentally believe when it does come back, what we do is going to be of greater importance than it's ever been in the past. You know, that of actually helping sustain local communities through travel itself is going to be one of the most powerful things of what travelers are going to want. So really what we are trying to do is help keep all those small businesses up and running as best as we possibly can.
Brilliant.
I mean, I agree with everything you said. I guess I'm a little bit skeptical as usual. My question is, if it will take 3, 4, 5 years as just a number, I don't know how people can hold out 3, 4, 5 years. And I'm wondering if there has to be some kind of fundamental change to some of these destinations to rely less on tourism and build other sources of income. Not an easy thing for sure. I'm just wondering if it's misleading to say, you know, things will get back to the way they were before. I personally just think that's
no, I don't believe they're going to come back to the way they were before. I believe we're seeing a fundamental shift in where people go. And again, Demian, when we look forward, you know, big cities have basically disappeared, and you see it where outdoors, you know, I look at our search for going into the Scandinavias, you know, of the world, the national parks in the United States, you know, desire people to go into the South Island of New Zealand have never been greater. So yes, when I talk about it, I'm talking specifically around those in those places where we are seeing a shift towards. It is not a global phenomenon by any means. You know, the fact is, you know, travel will come back. I think we just simply do not know where it'll come to. We don't know what it will look like, and we don't know what people want to do. And bringing in that agility, you know, the fact is we work with thousands of suppliers around the world. And, you know, there are certain ones of them that we've got to try and help them. And, you know, it is that what we are doing, but clearly we are not helping everyone.
great.
It's interesting you say that, Gavin, because I must admit that in this conversation, and it's been lovely getting your perspective, especially in this time of profound transformation, if not intervention. I've never understood before, like I do now, the fact that when you're dealing with a travel tour company, all those pieces of the chain are those, as I said, psychological insurance policies, but each of them in a crisis needs to be attended to with as much importance. What I was amazed at was when I heard another interview you did, and you were saying your first priority at the crisis, when it started, was actually repatriating people that were on tours. And I think we forget about that it's not crisis is, it's not linear, it's layered. I have a question for you before we start to wind down. As exhausting as this year has been, as gut-wrenching as it's been on everyone in the industry, and especially your family, being a frontline worker of an essential industry beyond healthcare, why are you a better leader because of this?
Look, and Nita, I'm not going to talk about myself personally. I'm going to talk about the company, and because I really look at the leadership position we have as an organization, and I think there have been a few fundamental things we have done well. Number one is the fact that we looked with absolute great clarity as to the enormity of the situation we're in, and made very tough decisions very early on as to how to approach them. And whether these were issues around cash flow, or issues of how do you look after our guests, or how do we engage with our guests. One of the great successes we had very early on was the use of social media. Social media is a communication tool to really not only inform what we were doing, but to keep the inspiration of travel alive. And sharing some of the great experiences. You were here, this is where you could have been. And that worked. Obviously that passion came through loudly. Number two is the fact of how we have reimagined. And particularly, I think one of the biggest things we have looked at is that of technology. And when we looked at what was coming, it was really looking to make sure and seeing the enormity of the shift of how consumers engage with us utilizing technology. The statistics around moving from PC to that of handheld devices is seismic, right? And so making sure how we were communicating in a mobile-first world was dramatic. Being driven by what consumer trends were was enormous. Last is really that of agility. And if you look back historically, we have always been on a single launch cycle. X month you bring our USA and Canada series to month. Y month we bring X. So we have now moved to a launch cycle completely driven around consumer demand. And one of the things I am most excited by is, we saw very early on was the need for domestic travel. But one of our great opportunities historically has always been, we are so great at long haul travel, which did not exist. We've never really had enough Australians traveling with us in Australia. We have good numbers of Americans traveling with us in America, but not huge. And so we pivoted. And we created domestic series specifically for the domestic traveler, using that same knowledge, that same expertise to enable them to travel and discover their own backyard. And one of the things that we saw, which again, it's that pivot in listening and learning, was obviously the tragedy of the death of George Floyd. And in the midst of that, I wrote a piece to the internal team about some of my personal sentiments. And one of the heads of our sales team, we have this platform called Yammer, which is our internal communication tool. He basically challenged me, and he turned around and said, if you look at all of our domestic trips, we have never, ever focused on the civil rights movement. Why don't we, if it's so topical? And I wrote back to him and I said to him, yeah, you're right. And in fact, so I said, we will do this and you will have a new trip in 2022. We then stopped, Anita, thought about it. So why are we waiting until then? And we have now costed, contracted everything, and we will be bringing out a new trip specifically around tracing the footsteps of Dr. King, but starting at his place of death, finishing in his place of birth. So kind of doing it in the reverse for obvious reasons, because you still want people to have see the world through a different lens. And that will be coming to market in January of 2021. So, that is the agility I think all of us have had to learn and adapt to in this COVID world. And I've embraced it. The fact is, there are so many variables we cannot control. And what I really speak to the various people that I work with every day is the fact is, if we focus on the things we can control, we will be able to actually identify the opportunities that will come out of this and make sure we fill those voids and plug into them.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Gavin. I think that's all the time we've got. I'm sure our audience would have more questions, and hopefully we'll get you back maybe in season 3 to update us on how things have progressed, and hopefully, with some better news. So thank you again for being with us.
Wonderful to have been with you, and wonderful seeing both of you, and safe travels, Anita.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Huge loving thanks to you, and all the best to the family.
Thanks, and from us to you. And Demian, pleasure to be with you too.
You as well. Thank you, Gavin.
Bye-bye.
It's interesting, Demian, that in our survey in the hiatus, people said they wanted more time with the executives and residents, hence why we did this today. It's quite special getting that extra time and that extra perspective, especially from the front line of the industry, as a barometer. So, which begs the question, Grouch, concerns and confidences.
So many concerns. I'm going to go with 2 concerns. And the first one is, maybe selfishly, I'm concerned that our audience is going to find confusing our new system of having a live episode one week and then a recorded, shorter, more practical advice episode the next week, and then back to a live episode like today. So I guess my concern is, will our audience adapt to our new schedule?
I hear you, but I must admit I have more confidence in, as Gavin says, their agility and their flexibility. We've made 1 week live, 1 week recorded, 1 week live, 1 week recorded, because a lot of people are going back to work, back to school. So we wanted that flexibility. And we've got all of our social platforms to be able to communicate to people what's happening in the week ahead. And we've got the website at rise-weekly.com for people to watch past episodes and rewatch their favorites. So I think give people credit. We'll make sure that we let you know, so we remind you when you need to be back in the office and showing off your shows. But I think our viewers are pretty confident. I trust them, and I ask all of our viewers, you all know how to reach Demian. If you feel he's going to forget to show up, just drop him a message.
All right, I guess I have a second concern, real quick one. It's kind of a combination. On the one hand, I'm concerned, our school, just like travel companies, are taking all these steps to protect people, social distancing, less people, etc. But then when our students are off campus, we have no say in how they behave. Just like when you're off the plane, the airline has no say on how you behave, so they're not sure what's going to happen when you reboard that plane. So I guess my concern is to my students saying, we're not through this pandemic yet. And I think, the assumption of young people, which we read about, that we're immune or we don't really get sick, or, hopefully the students in Europe are seeing what's happening in America, that's been back in school for a few weeks, and recognizing that they have to change their perception of what it means to be in college and the social side of that. And so I guess my concern is that not everybody sees that, just like not all travelers see the implications they have when they travel.
Indeed. And I must say that I agree with your concern. I have confidence that people will recognize that we have to be in this for the long run. And I'm hoping to God that people recognize this is not something to get and get over, because we are only discovering the impact of this virus. And especially if 85% of people are asymptomatic, only when flu season hits do we actually realize that we had it and how badly it hit us in terms of our physiology. So concern, confidence, and prayer.
Well said.
Stunning. And we slide to the close, sir.
Look, it was a great episode, and I'm looking forward to what's happening next week, because, as we talked about this season, we said, one of the things we want to do is give people more practical advice. What are specific things they should do to help them personally, but also professionally through this time? And so each of these, odd weeks, we're going to bring on an expert to provide really practical advice to help people. Why don't you explain what's going on next week?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'll do. And this is a really important one because this has come up as a request and some questions in the last season around the issue of insurance and people wanting to be able to get an understanding of how does travel insurance now impact my travel? Am I covered? What's going to happen? And these are questions that emerge usually when people have adrenaline running through their system because they've lost their travel. So we thought we're going to bring a travel expert to the Rise stage. And we have a lovely colleague and friend, Robin Ingle, who's going to be coming and giving us a little bit of an assessment of what do you need to know about travel insurance? Because the insurance industry has had to pivot. They have had to really become flexible in being ultimately Willy Wonka's golden ticket as to whether or not people travel, because they don't want to get stuck because of border closures, because they fall ill, or something happens with the companies that they've put their money into. So anticipate next week, you're going to see lots of social media coming out. It'll give you a sense of exactly when to see and where, but join us for Rise in Practice. This is going to be a really fantastic new segment just for you, created for you, with you, and because you asked for it. And we do have more Q&A coming up afterwards in terms of the inbox. We have more questions that'll be on as we close the show on the hour, which it is now. But for the moment, as always, please go to rise-weekly.com. All of season 1 is there. You can see the grouch moving from being grouchy and I just want to get through this pandemic to actually saying to everyone, be careful. This is really important. Who knew you could actually start liking the concept of huggability, Demian? So for the moment, to Demian, to you, to all of our viewers, to everyone watching around the world, to our magnificent Wizards of Oz who have done a great job in jazzing up season 2. From my side, before I hand over to Demian, I give you the usual. This has not changed. Stay safe, stay strong, stay hopeful, and keep your hands clean. Professor Hodari, for the close.
Yeah. Great episode, and I'm really looking forward to not only next week, but to people staying on who want to do more of the Q&A in the inbox just after this. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you later next week or the week after.